Welcome to this very brief training session on data visualization. Today we are going to take a look at a number of features in Chart.js that we can use to create online interactive graphs, as well as how to add our own branding into our products. We will be covering this presentation in 5 major sections. Firstly, we'll look at an example of interactive graphs and how it's actually used by other statistical organizations to increase the quality of their output. Then we'll have a look at basics of Chart.js, and we'll create a Chart.js chart using pre-written code. We'll then talk about branding, and I will briefly discuss the shortcuts, toolkits, and the templates we've developed to make your work easier. This is the website of the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Now, one of the differences between how they represent their data to what DCS does is that you can actually see that this is a document that is written on a web page as opposed to a PDF. So all of the components in here are able to have a much greater level of user interaction. If I look at this chart, for example, when I hover over it, it shows me exactly where I'm hovering and what the precise value is for that point of the visualization. And it also responds in a way for me to me zooming in and gives me a great deal more clarity than looking at a PDF, because I can point at each data point and understand what exact shifts of data is occurring, and it's a lot clearer. You can interact with the graph. So this is a solution quite similar to Chart.js, but the difference is that unlike Chart.js, what they've used here is a paid piece of software. Now we are trying to replicate that same effect by using the free solution, which is Chart.js. And we'll see how to achieve this degree of output just by using a bit of pre-written code and very basic programming knowledge. Now here's the Chart.js website. And as you can see, it's very straightforward. There's a lot of things you can explore here. And if you actually go into the Get Started page, you will immediately be greeted with examples, much like the one we're going to see here. Now, they've given you the opportunity to select a chart. And in a later example, we'll see how to copy this chart into our own worksheet and visualize the data that they have here. So rather than writing things from ground up, we'll copy the code that's already given as an example, and we'll go from there. Let's try that. Here I have a text editor. You can use any text editor you like. And here I have a page to test the output from my text editor. Now if I simply paste my data into this HTML file, we'll probably see nothing. That's because we haven't told the file to initiate Chart.js. We haven't linked the program with all the data that the page requires to understand what this is. So where do we get the data from? All the data that we need, all the files that we need, we very carefully assorted on the Nidhaus website. So if you go to Nidhaus, if you go to download assets, and at this very bottom, if you go to samples and code guides, we'll come back to these later. what you will find is that to initialize the graph, we need these codes. Right. And we paste it onto here. Now automatically, well, not automatically, we just entered the data, we have a graph here. Now let's actually take a minute and see how this graph works. So, this is the canvas. This is the object onto which the graph is drawn. And here is the script that draws the graph. It selects this canvas, and onto this canvas etches all of this data. The type of this chart is a bar chart, and the cool thing about this is you can actually change that to a line graph. And look, you can change it to a pie chart. There are quite a few options, and if you go into the Chart.js website, you will be able to read about all those options. I'm hoping that at this point, if you are taking this tutorial, you're somewhat familiar with it. If not, by the time we've done with this example, you will have a basic idea as to what a basic instance of a Chart.js object does. Now, in data here, we have labels. These labels are labels for your x-axis. These are your categorical variables. So, number of votes for the color red, number of votes for the color yellow, like that. And then once we've declared the labels that are common to all data sets, we go into defining the data sets. Now, number of votes, and the data for that is contained in this array. And you'll see that for this array, they've chosen in this example to go with individual colors for individual bars. Now, this is actually a little too much. It clutters the visualization, so let's get rid of this. And now you see a plain gray kind of graph. That's fine, because for the sake of convenience, we can give it a color. We call it background color, and if I go with blue, there. Let's also make that a little bit more prominent. There you go. Now, these are fixed in place, but you can have as many data sets as you want. All you do is you copy from this angle bracket to this, double bracket. You put a comma at the end of this, and then number of votes, you can call this 2020, and number of votes for 2021. Let's say they voted, these guys lost their vote, these guys gained, but not, so much. I'm randomizing the numbers just to give you the basic idea. And now if we save this, and let's give it a different color. Now look, it's already added, it's added the second data set. And now you can have the number of votes for 2020, number of votes for 2021. And these are dynamic, so you can actually see only one of these at a time if you like. There are options that you can define for each chart. And there is an incredible amount of customization you can achieve with Chart.js. And I encourage you to go and study the API very carefully. And when you design your own products, think of what you're doing, what your application is, and develop and make use of these options to develop the absolute end result that you need. This is just a very basic example. Now, that being said, this is your basic graph that you can achieve with Chart.js. But also, I want to point out to you that you don't necessarily have to rely on one type of graph. Let's hope I'm doing this right. You can actually go type, and then you can now look. If you want to, let's say, have the year on this angle, or on this on the bar chart, and the rate of change on the line graph, you can absolutely do that. Now, there are two problems here. This is filled, so I can't really actually see the values behind the graph. So what you can do is go fill. I think that's the option. Maybe not. I'll leave it as it is. And you can give this a border width of 3. So you can combine graphs. You can combine graph types. Obviously, sensible ones. I don't think I can combine it with, let's say, a pie chart. That would be very strange. Maybe I can combine it with a scatter graph. But yeah. So it is incredibly customizable, and it's very easy to use. Now, one of the things that you should understand is that you don't really have to put your data where your graph is. When I work with large data sets, I tend to separate the files. I have my user interaction in one HTML file, and then I take all of my data to a separate JavaScript file. For example, if this space is getting a little too cluttered, what I can do is move these, move both the x-axis data and the y-axis data to separate lines of variables. So I'll declare a variable here, colors, and I can just copy and paste this array onto there, this whole array, right? That's fine, that graph is going to disappear. And for the labels, for let's say 2020, I can open up another array and I can copy that onto here. Also, let's go 2021. I can similarly copy this array onto here. Now, our arrays are not really separate, but are positioned away from the actual mission critical code, or the configuration code. Now, in order to reintegrate that data back into the graph, we just type on there the array name. So 2020 here and 2021 here. Bring your data back into the graph, you can have these 3 lines separate from the actual configuration of the graph, and then you can give each of the array names to each criteria. Now if you save it, you have your graph, and it's much neater. So these are the little management aspects you need to learn when dealing with the program. Right, now this is a very simple example. Now in the next part of the tutorial, we'll have a look at how to actually format this and give it a look that is unique to DCS. We'll also look at how our aesthetics work in terms of our style sheets and what we put around the graph, like text and other objects that would give more context to the data. Now that we know how to develop a very basic graph, I encourage you to go to the Chart.js website and take a very good look at the various different customization options that they have to offer. There's a lot more examples you have to look at, and you will see that they offer a tremendous number of very, very customizable and configurable graphs and charts for you to use. Now, that being said, we have something quite basic here. And let's figure out a way to give this some branding, to make it look ours. The way we do that involves two crucial steps. Firstly, in the file where we have our HTML page, we should have this cascading style sheet and these two font files. All of these files are available from the Nidhas website. Let me show you where they are. If you go to the download assets section and if you scroll to the bottom, you'll find the style sheet here. Just download it and copy it to your page. And at the time of uploading this document, I don't have the font files here, but you will see the font files below this by the time this presentation comes to you. And let's go to samples and code guides for now. And it tells us, place your code for your graph within this wrapper. Now this is a wrapper. The purpose of this is to actually give some structure to the graph. Now let's copy the text from that and paste it here on our graph. Now, on this canvas, because the name of our chart that we have created here is my chart, that's what it's called, you'll copy that and paste it here. And if you save it, this is more like what you will find. Now you have a graph heading, a graph subheading, a source where you can put your source in, and then the Department of Census and Statistics, and the DCS logo. You don't have to worry about manually adding the logo. That logo comes straight from the DCS website. And of course it resizes without resizing all of our related branding items. Now this looks a lot more professional, and it was not very difficult for us to implement. Let's look at what actually happens here. It's wrapped in what you call a div, and it has a table in it, and this table has a place for your graph title, has a place for your graph footer, has a place for your source, and more importantly, it has a place for your canvas. This is the crucial bit. You locate your canvas between these two tables. It's sandwiched between these two tables. And these two tables are inside this div. Try and understand the structure of this. So this is two simple tables held together by a div, and in the middle of the two tables we put the canvas. That we can do is actually use a divider to divide up different sections of our presentation. And I use a div called divider to actually do that. Divider type hello there and look. So just say this chart is for GDP values. And And you can see the formatting is automatically applied. So it's already there. Now let's say you need to take this to one side of the screen, and you want to add here some text on the other side. Well, that can also be done. What we use for that is something called an unordered list, and the class of that list is partition. Now, it starts here and it wraps around this whole thing. And in that partition, we can get a list item to have our to contain our table in, or sorry, the graph, and have another list item for our text. And now you can see that our graph shrinks to half of the page size. And now you can actually give it a height. Much better. And for this list section, inside a paragraph container, we can put some text. Let me copy some dummy text actually. If you want some dummy text to look at how something looks, you can always copy some text from here. Now I'm just going to paste it between these font. Oh, right. Now look, you can have your write-up over here, and you can have your graph over here. And once you've done that, you can close this list and move on to the next section with another divider. Call that this chart is for inflation values. Now, again, without writing a lot of code, without dealing with style sheets, we have something that looks neat and tidy and consistent with the rest of the products that we develop in our brand. Now, for little things, like maybe if these things are not leveled, you absolutely can use any knowledge you have of CSS or rudimentary web development to change things around. For example, we can move this graph to the top, which means in this tile section we can say margin top is 0. Does that work? Yes. Now they're on the same level. And if you want more space for the graph, you can go to this list item. You can say style width, maybe let's say 400. And then if you are changing the width of this, you should go to this next partition and change the width to a lower value. Because this whole area is set at 800 pixels, so you should account for that and keep it within those values. Now, you can absolutely have a divider inside one of these list items as well. I'll say information. There you go. So that is a very rudimentary design of making a basic graph, a small description, and then partitioning that off to give some kind of organized viewing experience to the data user. Now, if you go to Netherhouse, and if you go to the Trading Resources section, Samples and Code Guide section, you will find applications for each and every kind of graph that is offered as part of the Chart.js package, and you will find code to initialize each and every type of those charts. Now, these are for emergencies. If you need to knock out very quickly a graph or a chart, you can just copy and paste from this section whatever appropriate code you need. Now let's take a look at a larger project, just to give an idea of what it can achieve and what sort of capabilities it has to add value to data. One of the first things I can show you is a dashboard that we have been developing. Now, for example, this dashboard takes from a list the update in prices for each product, and all of these additional calculations are derived from custom code, but these two graphs use Chart.js. So this is the kind of dashboard you can develop if you get yourself acquainted with Chart.js. Let's look at another example. The other example I have for you is a somewhat more complicated dashboard. Now, if you look at something like this, this has been developed using exactly the kind of tools that I've discussed in the presentation. And it's all meant to give the end user a much nicer experience and a much more viewable experience and a much better way to use the data that we have. Now, the databases for an application like this can get quite large, which is why I told you that as practice, we don't put our data and our code in the same place. Now, once you practiced with this all-in-one kind of arrangement, everything you can master, in a later session we'll cover how to compartmentalize data and styling into different documents. But this is just a glance on what you can do, the things you can do using the technologies that we've discussed in this presentation. So again, when designing these things, always adhere to brand guidelines. Pick the colors that we have recommended in the brand guidelines. And changing the colors and managing other visual aspects of these data sets is quite simple once you get yourself acquainted with Chart.js.